Welcome back, episode 58 of the Ground Up podcast. Stefan is a broker for development finance, bridging finance, all the joys.
Started working in the city when I was 21, but I grew up on homes under the hammer and loved property. So started flipping houses as soon as I got a job.
How the hell do you go from developing stuff to then in a service-based businesses? How do you not end up getting involved in developments again?
A first 100% mortgage come out this week. There are products out there with arrangement fees of 5%, 7%, and there's one lender who has a 10% arrangement fee. If your mortgage is 400 grand, that's a 40 grand arrangement fee on a buy-to-let mortgage, which seems nuts.
To me, that is the most obvious form of dodging a rule.
In this space, everything just costs thousands of pounds.
Ground up sound, ooh yeah, real estate deals. We lay them down, let's get those deals. Deals, deals, making money, baby.
Welcome back, episode 58 of the Ground Up podcast. We've got an interesting one today. We've got a special guest on with us, and we'll come to him shortly. But for anyone who's new to watching this podcast, then we are 4 property developers based in the UK. And every week we get together and talk about property, business, the trials and tribulations of borrowing money, dealing with banks, underwriters, and all the shit joys that come in between that, which is why in this very special episode, although we don't have Jack and Dorian, you've just got myself, Ryan, and Jack here. Sorry, Jack's here. Of course, Jack's here. Jack's
You're
never
like
not here.
my older brother, Stuart.
Just do it, mate. To be fair, I reckon me and Jack are the most punctual. Definitely getting Stu and Dee to turn up on time is very difficult. But they are not here today. I can't remember exactly why. I think UK Reef and manufacturing facility. Stuart's going to watch fucking rocks melt. Literally.
With Stu, you have to double organise everything. We'll organise Monday morning. I said, I can't make Friday, so let's do Thursday. Everyone was like, yep, cool, sounds good. Wednesday, everyone good for tomorrow? Oh, no, I can't. And I'm like, well, we literally only organised this 2 days ago, mate.
Yeah.
Fuck's happened in those 2 days?
Yeah.
So I've got to go up to Cardiff and check out the councils up there and make sure I can get my posy joist.
Yeah, Stuart's on a mad one. He's literally gone to a rock wall factory to watch rocks get melted down and turned into streams of insulation. I'm not shitting you. That is what he's gone to do. He's had it booked in for years. Very excited about it.
Stuart's diary is like a geography school trip. I've got to go to lunch with the bloke that owns Juicens, and then like next day he's like going to have a look at like he lives like a geography school day, doesn't he?
He does. And then he's on a boat trip and he's telling us all about all these people he's met, and we're like, fucking love you, Stuart, mate. It's great. And Dorian's at UK Reef. So we have a special guest with us. Our good friend Stefan Canavan. I always nearly go to say caravan, mate. I don't know if you have that, but I always go.
It wouldn't be the first time. It would not be the first time.
Stefan is a broker, commercial broker for development finance, bridging finance, all the joys of and stresses that come with financing development sites. Stefan's been there, done it, seen it 1,000 times. So today we're going to hash through lenders, bullshit, bollocks. But a little bit of background of Stefan. Myself and Jack have known him for many years now. Stefan has worked with me, and I'm sure you, Jack, on various deals and continuing to do so.
It's a real pleasure.
Pleasure, mate. Absolute pleasure. And just a quick testimonial from me. We went through, as a business, maybe 8 different brokers when we were starting out, and just couldn't get the service level. And we used yourself, Stefan, and it was just an absolute cut above, just so different. To have someone who actually carries everything through, has your back, is chasing you to do stuff rather than me go, where are we on this case, or what's this, and getting like half-assed information. Stefan's always well on top of it. He's pretty much been all hours for us, which, maybe we are quite demanding at times. But absolutely recommend. And the company is called Willow Capital. So we'll make sure we bring up the website screenshot here so you know exactly what company it is. But Stefan, please give us a proper introduction about yourself, who you are, maybe a bit of a backstory about how you got to where you are, Any awards you've won, things like that?
Yeah, no, I mean, so you've kind of explained Willow, uh, professional finance brokerage, specialise in everything regulated, so bridging development, mezz, equity. Um, Personally, I got married last year, having a baby this year.
Woo.
So we've only got, I think it's 9 weeks now. We're in the single digit countdown, so extremely excited about that. The story of how I got here is quite an interesting one. So I started working in the city when I was 21, but I, grew up on homes under the hammer and loved property. So started flipping houses as soon as I got a job. Um, we did 5 or 6 of those whilst working full time, and then I realized I kind of wanted to do property full time rather than work in the city. Unfortunately, the project we were going to do went into power of attorney, so that got put on pause after I'd gone on to sabbatical. So I ended up setting up, for want of a better word, like a high end project management company. So I'd sit in the middle between kind of rich people in London and builders and manage their house refurbs and house renovations. Those clients then became investors in what became a development company that I set up with a business partner. And that development company was nowhere near as successful as XP and Jack and Ben, but was similar in the fact that we were kind of very much deal led. As long as the deal had money and we'd go and do the deal, we weren't doing the same type of deal each time. So we did office to resi, title splits, new build, barn conversions. We did an office to resi of 22 units. So got a really broad background in delivering the developments ourselves. And I do think that although I don't develop big projects anymore, I still do a few small ones with my wife. The fact that I spent, the best part of 12, 13 years refurbing flats and building houses really makes us different as a broker, because we understand what it's like to go through, borrow the money, deal with the lender's bullshit, like you say, do drawdowns, go through all those trials and tribulations.
I call that gamekeeper come poacher.
Yeah.
I love that. That's us in XP Surveys. We were the client, now we're the business owner, and you get what the client needs. And I love that phrase, because it's if the poacher knows how the gamekeeper sets up all his traps, you're way more competitive at poaching.
Taking it to a different level now, because I think it's such an important thing. We've partnered with one of our clients to do a house refurb extension project, so that my team are now involved in that renovation and development from the start. And we go down each month to check on progress, and they learn, all of the steps of going through the professional appointments, understanding the build process. So, they're not, it's hard to, cram 10 years of development into one project, but I would like all of my staff to have some exposure to development so that it's real when they talk to clients.
That's thinking outside the box, mate, when it comes to wanting to offer that client service. So on the sort of other hand, and sympathizing with what we have to go through, because there's a lot of bollocks, and it just shows, mate, in your service quality, because you know about all the pre-con and discharging conditions, all these other bits, just to catch stuff before we introduce a monitoring surveyor, or before the underwriter may sign off X, Y, Z. And it's just having someone as a useful aid rather than kind of leaving the developer to it. As you get long in the tooth, these things become like process driven, which is great, and just means I know I can go, Stefan, I think I chucked you 2, 3 more jobs recently, and I was just like, I know I can just give you the information you need, and you'll just run with it and just tell me what you need as and when. And that relationship and trust with a broker is not something we were able to foster before. And we tried many a different brokers with good reputations as well, but they just didn't offer that service that we needed. I think particularly because we're scaling.
I think it just to second that point, I think it's the difference in what Stefan and his team bring to the table, the difference between a broker and an advisory. Anyone can go to a lender to market and go, here's their rates, here's the valuation quotes, here's the next legal requirements. But actually, Stefan stepping in and going, what is best for the client? I've been in this situation before. What I'm seeing market wide. Not that I could have used Stefan anyway, but we got some debt terms from a broker, and they sent me the valuation quotes of 3, and I went back and I was like, who would you advise? And like, it's that advisory that is really useful in the market space, because if we're doing, we're super active. Both Ryan and I are really active in the market space, but I still don't feel like I'm closer than you are. And your advisory of seeing the whole market scape, adding your opinion, is, well, whether you're a new developer or even, an experienced developer, is really important.
I think the other thing as well is that the market just moves so quickly. You guys are already spinning. Yeah, yeah. And for the last 2 3 years, arguably it's been the worst time to be a broker. It's not been a fantastic time to be a developer. But it moves so quickly, and you guys are all spinning so many plates, from finding cash, sourcing, building, managing your professionals. You know, we must have over 150 lenders on our books just on the unregulated side. You don't have enough time to understand what's going on with all of them. Where are they priced? What are the new product releases? What's the best setup for that deal? So, having someone like us, hopefully it is us. If it's not, that's cool. But having someone like us who can just take that pain away, and you can trust and say, look, what is the best kind of structure and the most suitable lenders for this deal? And hopefully, with our clients, we do like to get to a stage where it is like with you, Ryan, where it is just you WhatsApp me a link and just go get on with it. And we that works. That works.
Just to add as well, I believe you partnered with Mr. Steve as well, so you've got both ends now. You've got the unregulated and the licensed stuff for the back end.
Yeah, we're in the process of setting up a regulated side to the business. Our unregulated side generates a lot of regulated business. So people refinancing out of a lot of house refurbs, title split type deals. And we wanted to be able to be a fully offer all finance offerings under kind of one Willow umbrella. So hopefully we're going through our FCA authorization at the moment. So hopefully come the end of the year, we'll be able to formally launch that, which will be Willow our mortgages.
Can I suggest some phrasing? Rather than it being Willow umbrella, it should be the Willow canopy.
Ooh. Ideas. Well, Stefan, let's do a little deep dive on your on the actual business of being a broker. But just first, obviously, you mentioned you ran developments for about a decade. When was that sort of transition? Why the transition to pure kind of brokering? What was the sort of mentality there behind that decision?
So the developments we were doing came to a natural end, and the people that I was working with at the time, we all kind of felt it was the right time to go and do our own thing. Our developments at the time were between London, Stoke, and Manchester, and I was in a I was in a fairly serious relationship in Manchester, so I was spreading my time between London and Manchester. And unfortunately, the developments outlasted the relationship, and I wanted to become much more London centric. When you're doing a 22 unit office to resi in Manchester, our total capital expenditure there was probably £1 million. To do the same deal in London at that time was probably 10 million. So the development business just looked very different. And to be honest, I wasn't the boots on the ground guy. I liked structuring the deals, finding the money, putting the deals together. And I just saw a gap in the market that when I was developing, I didn't find a broker who had a strong financial background. I didn't find a broker who really understood what they were doing. I felt they were trying to take as much money from each deal to do as little work as possible, wouldn't support you end to end through the transaction. And fundamentally, had never even refurbed a house, let alone built a house. And I just thought there's got to be a better way to do it. Give clients more for less. And ran with that premise. And fortunately, it seems to have resonated, and we've grown since.
Amazing, mate. So when you started, when you went, all right, I'm going to be a broker full time. What was the roadmap? Did you set up a business plan? Who's the first hire? How did you get those first kind of collection of clients, revenue? give us a snapshot of how you grew that business from the start.
I mean, I think anyone who launches a business, you know, you you need a little bit of a screw loose, right? I think at the time, my mum thought I was a bit mad. And the hardest thing is getting those first clients through the door. I mean, you must have found it with XP surveys, Jack. You know, when you're doing a service-based business, the hardest part is getting those first clients through the door. I mean, I did everything. I was at 5, 6 networking events a night, trying to find anyone who would listen to me, talk to me, understand what we were doing, try and get the business. I was cold messaging people on LinkedIn, cold calling, you know, developers, websites, speaking to people I'd met at other networking groups like Quorum was one back in the day, and just doing everything I possibly could to get what I was doing out there and why I thought it had value. And, you know, it becomes one of those kind of snowball effects, doesn't it? You get one person, you do a good job for them, they refer you to someone else, then you're credentialized, and slowly you build and build. But it definitely didn't happen overnight.
What do you think's your biggest risk in your business from a business perspective?
I mean, you can always say AI at the moment, you know, the more everything comes in automate, but I do think
There's already platforms out there that do that though, isn't what's that brick one?
Brickflow. There's Brickflow, and I think you will be able to automate a lot of potentially the term side of it. You know, going out and actually getting different types of terms, but the people side of it, and I think what people don't realize, particularly on the unregulated side, if you've not worked on a development or investment project before, and you've only worked with a buy to let mortgage or a residential mortgage, the two worlds are completely different. So on a buy to let and residential mortgage, it is speak to your broker, computer says no, the broker just says you can or can't do this. In the unregulated world, you know, we sent out a deal last week. We had 3 lenders phone us up after we sent it and just said, where do I need to price this to win this? I then said, this is the best I've got. It was undercut, 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 undercut. So it was a bidding war. You wouldn't see Halifax and HSBC getting into a bidding war for a deal. Then when you're going through a deal, I mean, Brian, how many times have you said to me, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do this. This PG is too high. This person's not signing a document. You know, you can't do that with a big bank. But in the unregulated world, it's almost like everything's negotiable, or at least we try and negotiate on everything. And that people side of the business will be very hard to take away.
Thought about this a number of times. There's the conveyancing side of if you just look at the different kind of knowledge-led professional services that you get for a developer, solicitors, AI could just take their whole job in a way, or at least massively reduce the cost of their job and the kind of rate they can charge out because of how simplified it could be. Same with land registry, local searches, all that kind of stuff in conveyancing. I think would
Valuers,
be
valuers, I think.
valuers. Yeah, valuers as well. And the same with the back end mortgage, like you're saying as well. I still think I would want, if you know, if I'm exiting like £1 million, £2 million scheme or something, I would still want someone who's vouching for me out in the market to try and find the best deal, unless there just becomes such an obvious lender that could do it. But when it comes to dev finance, there's so many moving parts and every deal is different and bespoke. The way you want to structure it's bespoke, that I don't see how you're not going to want an intermediary, someone who can act for you, because regardless, you're going to be borrowing lots of money from someone, and that money's going to come with a price tag of PGs and things like that. So I don't see AI being your biggest disruptor. It's probably going to be, it might reduce your pricing because if competitors start using it, but then you'll probably be able to do more business, and there's going to be a race for best service quality, and that's probably who's going to win in your market.
I think AI can obviously take in simple projects. Like if you've just got a consented PD scheme of 20 units, most of the contention is going to evolve around like legal conveyancing. That you know, but if you're like us and you phase sites and you have 6 different planning applications and you lease part of it, sell part of it, other part of it, it's impossible. Question I had, which I was going to ask you, Stefan, which is like market wide stuff and just why I absolutely detest working with debt lenders. If there's a few things that I could get rid of in our business, it would be bad lawyers, and 90% of lenders. I just feel that from the point of you getting terms to them actually doing the deal, they just take the piss. Most of them, like annoyingly a majority, and I take my hat off to you for dealing with them and having to deal with your clients and then permanently. Like I feel that's you've got the patience of a saint. But what I don't understand is you mentioned a price war, and you mentioned, all you've got to do is trip over a curb in London, and you've fallen into a bridging lender's office. They're fucking everywhere. So in a market space that's super high supply, probably in excess of demand. I don't know. I've never actually looked at the stats, but why is it that the service is still shit? Because typically, when there's mass supply and low demand or lower demand, typically it has to be a good service to get repeat business to keep the businesses alive. But I still feel like the service is the opposite way, as if there's way too much demand and only a bit of supply, and they go, well, that's it. That's what we're doing. See you later if you don't like it.
Oh, it's hard. I mean, to pick up on a couple of things you said. Firstly, the market, in the first 4 months, 5 months of this year is the most competitive we have seen it with lenders. Um, Lenders are having to, you know, really think outside of the box to win deals, because there's only so much you can win on price. There's only so much you can win on service, and therefore that we are getting a lot of new product innovations. And it is actually quite an exciting time in that space, and a time where we're actually being able to add real value to our clients. Lenders are a pain in the backside to deal with, but I think there's a couple of things to, particularly through the process, right, Jack, where you're basically going underwriting and kind of up to completion is what's annoying you. So part of that is, the amount of hoops to jump through for a developer and a lender, and the bureaucracy is just getting worse. You've got all of the planning condition discharge, now BNG. There's so many legal issues. There's so much to check that, they do have to make sure that everything is okay. And you are, significantly experienced in this space. Sometimes when clients come to me and go, I'm finding this process really difficult. Why are they asking so many questions? I do always try and point out that, you know, by them covering all of these questions and checking everything, and yes, it can ultimately be extremely painful, they're also covering your backside. They're making sure that very little can go wrong in this project. And by them doing all the checks, it covers you. The clients we see who've got themselves into the biggest messes are people who've built sites in cash, and they haven't had a lender overseeing it. They didn't have a lender check everything. They haven't had a monitoring surveyor. And when they come and refinance, and we're like, where's this? Where's that? Why's that not been discharged? Why don't you have that bit of paperwork? They go, well, I didn't know. There was no one to tell me. And so I completely agree. It can be extremely frustrating. They can ask for everything but your inside leg measurement. They have a tendency to, change terms at the last minute or just change their mind. And it is infuriating. But there is also that silver lining of, if you do get to completion and the lender has okayed everything, there's a bit of you that can go, okay, if the lender's happy, I should be okay, at least from a, covering my backside perspective.
Yeah, to be fair, I get that, and I know that whoever you're dealing with in the fund, wherever the funds are coming from, are basically wagging the dog, right? That's the tail, and they've got to comply with those questions. I'm more referring to, I have someone now in the company that answers all their questions. That doesn't bother me. That I'm removed from answering all these questions, finding all these certificates. I've got an employee that does that, so that bit doesn't bother me. The thing that bothers me is the unpragmatism on reality. So for an example, we work with a debt lender who we've actually worked with loads, and we developed, this is our Marlow site, developed the site out. The original Red Book valuation was at 2.9 million GEV. The bank have gone, yep, cool, happy to do the deal, 70%, 75% loans cost or whatever it was. Did the deal all the way through. We needed a 3-month extension. The scheme has gone really well. We've hit the market really well. We've sold pre-agreed sales on 6 of the units. All of the sales are above guide price. The guide price that we had hit the market with was above the 2.9. So we're selling the site at like 3.25. So we've got about 350 grand's worth of value on top of the original Red Book valuation. When we came to do the 3-month extension, the lender said, we can't give you that because the GDV is 2.9 and actually we need some more cash to extend it by 3 months. And we said, well, it's not, because our 6 sales have proven that our GDV is higher than that. And we've actually got reservation fees. And, as of today, we've actually exchanged on a few, but back then we hadn't. And at that point, surely they can go, yeah, you've proven that the now value, the pound per square foot is way higher than what the Red Book value had out, but they didn't. They said, let's get the value out. So the value went out, and the value said, I still think it's 2.9. And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, what more proof do you want than selling units? Like, that's 6 out of the 8 units. So then we had to get another valuer out, which was another 4.5 grand plus VAT. Who then did a good valuation at 3.2, still 50k below, but anyway, that's fine. And then they're like, oh yeah, well, yeah, here's your extension. You don't need to put any more capital in. And that's like a prime example of sometimes you just want to grab them and just be like, can you explain to me what I'm thinking? Because I don't think you get it.
Sometimes that is our what we really try and do for the clients, is try and drum in that element of sensibility. Part of it as well is just, in the unregulated world of finance, there isn't a rule book, right? And unfortunately, some lenders, will try and get away with what they can unless you really try and hold them to account. And sometimes you do have to really push them. So, if I take your example on,
You know me, I love holding people to account, and they just don't buy it. And this is what I don't get. Like 9 times out of 10, they'll just go, no, that's it. That we're not negotiating. It's black and white. This is our decision. And I'm like, I don't know how you've got that decision. It's kind of, it's just unruly. But anyway, and that's kind of the back to the source of my question. How can they be so difficult if there's a lot of competition in the market? If we were that difficult, if we were that difficult in our surveying business, we would have gone bust.
but I think that comes down to the sustainability of their business models. So if at that point they've got you over a barrel, so they can be difficult, but then you won't work with them again, and you'll probably go and tell your friends not to work with them again. But those lenders that are easy to deal with, and we do assess lenders on the subjectivity of how easy they are to deal with, how easy they are on things like extensions. And then we know the lenders who are more difficult, and the lenders who are easier to deal with, particularly at the back end, are the ones who win repeat and repeat business. Those who aren't are more singular transaction type business models who, will look to take as much out of a transaction as possible. And if they don't work with the client again, they don't work with the client again. I'm not suggesting it's the right type of business model to run. But unfortunately, there are businesses that run different ways. But I do get it, Jack. And we half our days are just spent dealing with problems created often by lenders that probably shouldn't be problems.
The inadverted or second-hand regulation that affects lenders, because just to clear up as well for our listeners, we mentioned that the commercial markets are unregulated, so commercial lending is unregulated, and it is in a sense of retail protection for the borrower, but it's not in terms of the second-hand regulation, the risk mandates, all the private stuff that happens internally within these banks where they get their funding from, and then having to adhere to the new regulations that come secondhand off of new things introduced to the planning system, BNG, all this kind of stuff, just congests the system more and more. And it's just interesting to touch on because, yes, a new planning regulation comes in, it affects the developer from one side. Now it affects them twice because they've got to deal with it on the lending side as well. So all these new regulations that are coming in, particularly on the HRB stuff, on bigger sites and the difficulties of navigating this marketplace as a developer. And then you've got lenders doubling down on all that stuff as well, because they've got their tick box exercises to make sure you, the developer, are following all of this compliance and all these regulations. Do you think at any point it's just going to become too much, and there's just going to be too much regulation, and these kind of challenger banks and these kind of fringe lenders who are out there, do you think they're just going to struggle to get to critical mass, to get to scale, and it might just be a few kind of incumbent players that end up sweeping up? What do you think is going to happen if the regulation keeps sort of going the way it's going?
I think predominantly the banks will be okay because people always need money, and people always need money for different reasons, and different types of lender setup are there to meet different types of lender needs. I do have a concern for the developers that I talk to, that the increased regulation and bureaucracy is just not going to make it worth your while anymore. You know, the amount of crap that you've got to go through when I see it to build a 1-2 unit scheme, take that scheme and the business might be a 400 grand GDV, 200 grand a house. Do you really want to go through discharging all of your planning conditions, B&G, all of that kind of crap? By the end of it, what have you made? Like 20, 30 grand? And it's a very hard way to make money on those smaller schemes. And the problem is as the UK, we need those houses. And I think that you guys should be supported in trying to get them built, not constantly, every bloody week have new hurdles chucked in front of you that makes the process more painful.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a big move to favoring the incumbents, the big players, and the SMEs are just getting completely wiped out. We'll see what happens over the next few years, because the market's been really bad as well, and a bad market is always going to kill off a lot of players. But it's sad, the idea that SME developers, mum and dads, people who just want to do one or two houses here and there, they usually make the really beautiful, bespoke, well thought out, loving and caring schemes. And it's those ones that sell for the best values on the streets in given areas, because they can do that. One or two individuals can really micromanage a scheme, refurbishing a house, doing a new build, an infill site or something, and they'll make it immaculate, compared to a Persimmons who'll just come in and whack up cardboard boxes, hitting numerical mandates for their shareholders. And it is sad, the idea that we might lose all these kind of bespoke developments that happen in and around towns and cities and rural locations. Do you think that's a trend that's going to continue?
I really hope not. I really hope not, because I mean, if weirdly, if you look at our Instagram this week, we do like a project spotlight of just, sometimes you just get really cool, quirky type deals that we've done. And these two barn conversions that this client has completed, we did a dev exit loan on it, are just beautiful. And you look at it before, and it was just this giant agricultural type shed. And you take those kind of properties off the market. Like you say, a big house builder is never going to go and build that type of house. You don't just want everything to become the same. If we're all the same, life would be boring.
I saw that development. It looks really cool, actually.
It is. It is really cool.
SMEs can do that, right? SMEs bring so much diversity to a marketplace, because it's loads of ideas and things like that. And ultimately, it comes down to the ability to do these things, comes down to what level of regulation, because the size, and me and Jack are playing this game, and Dorian and Stu all the time, that the bigger we get, the easier things get, but also the more risk you take on, and you got the death valleys in between. But then you kind of get to a size and you go, okay, well, now Jack's got staff in these places. I've got staff in those places to deal with the conveyancing, the bullshit, the planning, and all that kind of stuff. But if you don't have that, then, and you're a one-man band, you're just going to struggle and struggle and struggle more and more for less and less and less margin. And if lending and borrowing gets harder, cost of construction goes up. It just there doesn't seem to be an end in sight. It just feels like we've come out of the storm of really bad, volatile macro market movers, things that none of us can affect. And then there's the decision making from bureaucracy that's just going, yeah, we're going to make it harder again. We're going to bring in HRB, and we're going to make it on smaller sites, and we're going to introduce the Building Safety Act, and you're going to hit EPCCs across the board. And it's just like, what the fuck? This is just crazy levels of, like, they shouldn't be adding so much at any given time. And I'd bang on about it all the time on the podcast. Is the regulation to me is the biggest issue above and beyond anything else.
I mean, it's naturally going to move that way, and we are going to see less of the unprofessional people. And selfishly, it's good for us, Ryan. But for the world, is it a good thing? You're not going to get, like you say, the more intimately delivered projects. Stefan, I've got a question around the regulation. So in the regulated market space, obviously there's affordability criteria which were brought in, I believe, after the credit crunch. So you could only borrow a certain amount against the ratio of income. And what we all see in the market space is those lenders agree their rates of the monthly mortgage costs. So let's say a borrower can only afford like 4.5%, and then the way that they enable the facility to get over the line is they just increase the product fee or the arrangement fee. Now, to me, that is the most obvious form of dodging a rule.
I'm not 100% certain. So on regulated mortgages, your primary residence mortgage, and just to be clear, I'm not a regulated broker, so I'm not. It's not my 100% area, especially. But on a regulated mortgage, you are held to your income multiples, and I don't think they do a whole load of flexing around fees to get around your personal primary home. On the buy to let world, that is where you are seeing the high fees, low rates to get around the stress testing. Is that more what you're talking about?
Yes.
So what's going on in the buy to let world? And it is wild that this now it exists, but there are products out there with arrangement fees of 5%, 7%, and there's one lender who has a 10% arrangement fee. I mean, if your mortgage is 400 grand, that's a 40 grand arrangement fee on a buy to let mortgage, which seems nuts. But the reason that exists is because, particularly for a lot of single let units in London and the South at the moment and for the last 12 months, they are just not passing the rental stress test to get any type of leverage for that buy to let mortgage. So what the lenders have said is, okay, previously our product was structured for with a 2% arrangement fee and a 6% rate. Instead, what we're going to do is going to drop this to a 3% rate and an 8% arrangement fee so that your rent can pass the stress test. And it is fundamentally just robbing Peter to pay Paul so that they can help clients get the required leverage.
Yeah. So my question is, how is that even? If for an example, this was a regulation to us. So let's say it's a regulation on us as developers. You'd just get called out on that. You'd be like, oh, so see what you've done there. Nice, clever. Stop that. I don't understand how you can regulate something, but allow them to do something that gets around that regulation with the same product. There's no degree of removed. It's just there's a regulation and they get around it.
But it also is hugely beneficial. So, it can annoy you, but you're probably very happy.
No, I'm more referring to if I was running that regulation governance, I'd be like, everyone in the market's fucking taking the piss here. We put in a regulation, they're all getting around it. What's the point in having a regulation if everyone can get around it?
I suppose the market will always respond to regulators, though, won't it? And if the market says, "Look, you can want what you want, but if we don't making money, we were not going to lend, and here's one way we can get around it to make money." And if everyone kind of clocks onto the same thing and just essentially kick the can down the road on the margin of interest rate difference, then I don't know what the regulators can really do there because they need the lenders to lend.
Yeah, I just feel it's like it's almost like, let's say the police say you're not allowed to steal, right? But I've gone into a shop and I've got a prosthetic hand and it took someone's purse and put it in my pocket. But I didn't use my hand to do it. I just used a prosthetic hand to put it in my bag. And it's kind of like it's the same shit, but you're just getting around the nuance of the affordability criteria of the cost of finance.
You're getting, and so I don't know the exact regulation, not being a regulated broker, but you could argue that they are still technically meeting the regulation. So if you look at the total, so if you take two products, one with a low fee and a high rate, and one with a high fee and a low rate, typically they cost a very similar amount over the same fixed period. So what they are not doing is charging you a lot more for the high fee product than the low fee product. The product cost over the same period is the same. It's just cut and split in different ways. So I'd I think working in a finance market that can be, as you said, quite cumbersome, unpragmatic, unimaginative, not thinking about developers. I get how, potentially it could annoy you. But when I saw that come in, I thought, wow, actually, do you know what? The lenders have seen what's going on here. They found a way to adapt. They found a way to offer products that clients really need, particularly in London and the South, and they've seen a need and they're meeting it. So I think what they did there was moreover positive than getting annoyed about how it meets the regulations, because that was really needed.
The
And I speak for my own
Yeah, I mean, it's,
kind of
it's
thing. I've got a portfolio in London and the South.
I was just going to say, yeah. I mean, there might not be one sort of cynical answer. It's just when Ryan goes and rants about, um, restrictions and things going on. I feel that was a restriction put on in the finance market that hasn't been followed up and managed, policed.
You might have seen recently, and this is, and again, it's in the regulated market, but it is slightly worrying. As you know, we've had I think there's a first 100% mortgage come out this week. Um, and you've also got a couple of lenders have started to relax their stress testing, and all of this is with the right thing in mind to help more first time buyers get onto the housing ladder and to stimulate the housing market. But it's is it a concern that we are starting to creep back into that territory that, calls the yeah, yeah, it's, if you give someone an inch, they take a mile, as soon as one starts going, does the other start going? And then you have to start to creep, because if one person's offering it, do you need to offer it to make yourself competitive? And I don't think we'll end up in the same space as '08, but, you, you don't want to run the risk of even getting close.
Yeah, I think and I think about this a lot, like mostly because I love Bitcoin, and so does Stuart. I don't talk about it quite as much as Stuart, but I think about it a lot. And I think a lot about this relationship between the left and the right foot of of government and finance, where you've got the regulators on one side, and then you've got the financiers on the other side. So you've got the BOE, the Bank of England, who adjust and fix monetary policy, and then you've got the regulators and the bureaucracy and the policymakers and all these people appeasing democracy and appeasing genuine health and safety requirements and things like that. You've got these two arms here, and neither of them are in sync or and it feels like there is no collective understanding of what's going to happen to the property market if we keep going the way we're going, because we've just talked about rates there on assets in say London and higher value areas not meeting the stress tests on what are quite low rates. Historically speaking, the actual percentage of rate is low, but the asset values are so inflated because of bad fiscal policy and because of other stimulants in that local market, particularly London, where you've got a large portion of the rented sector and these assets held by foreign investors who have no vested interest in London other than the fact that they treat it like a bank vault. And that's just inflating asset prices, meaning that these assets are no longer tenable on a standard mortgage with not even that higher rate. Like it only takes like a 4%, 5% rate in London. And you can suddenly that the rental disparity between that and the interest rate of servicing is just it's just not there because people can't afford on an earnings perspective. They just can't afford to pay the increased rents that would subsidize that level of debt on interest payments, which means there's a huge disparity between what's happening with asset values and what's happening with net earnings, which is seen in GDP per capita. We're like becoming poorer and poorer as a nation. Then you add on all the regulations that just make building homes more and more expensive, plus really bad fiscal policy, running a deficit, having to print more money. We're basically going, we're going to release loads more money, which is kind of what's happened. And that's why now they're bringing back, the slightly better terms on mortgage products like these potential 100% mortgages. But what's just going to happen is it's going to inflate asset values again. And the regulations are making it more costly. And then we're going to get back into that pinch again, where it's like, oh, fuck, we're stress tested now in more areas than just London because earnings aren't going up. And I just think it's going to be a problem that keeps ossifying, and we're going to like kind of fall back down, and the market comes back a little bit, but then quicker and quicker, it then congests again because you just can't. First time buyers just wouldn't be able to afford these higher and higher and higher amounts of debt they're servicing, because there's just too much debt and people aren't earning enough to afford it. I don't know what you think there. If you think there is a kind of a precipice point where it just goes, no, people just can't afford to borrow anymore, so they're just going to rent, and we're going to become a very renters type society. Do you think that's something that could happen in the UK?
We could, and but if you look at kind of, if you take two European cities, London and Paris, the percentage of homeowners in London versus Paris, I believe, is significantly greater, and Paris is a much greater rental type economy. Our problem is that we also have landlords now leaving the market as well. So there's even less properties to rent, which is also pushing rents up. But on affordability, I mean, you see it in London all of the time. Areas just get too expensive, and then people just have to keep moving further and further out. Because living in zones 1, 2, 3 is la- largely unachievable. I mean, I don't know how much you've spoken about it before, but the problem with the UK is that we still just aren't building enough houses. With supply is constantly going to be outstripped by demand. So unfortunately, I just still don't see house prices coming down. They've stayed fairly stable and strong through the Liz Truss, through the Ukraine war, through all of these world events that we've had over the last 3 years. We keep waiting for the housing market to crash, and it's not, largely probably because we just have more demand than supply, and I don't see that changing anytime soon.
But also we're relaxing, mortgage mandates and the the serviceability, and these things just mean that the market can keep, it's like artificially keeping the market up with itself, like kicking the can down the road, and that thing, the example that Jack gave, where you can kick the can down the road on some of the margin on the interest, because it makes it more affordable. These things kind of help elevate the market and keep it sustainable, when really there should be a dip in London, that the asset prices are too high for the residents of London. Like I've got the flat in Fulham. I think you know it well, that Fulham Reach development, and I rent the flat. It's a one bed, and it's owned by a Saudi resident who doesn't even live in the UK, and he owns four of the apartments in that one row, and most of the blocks are owned by Saudis and Chinese investors who have their students, or just use them as China, or just use them as a store of wealth. Now, this same landlord who owns our one, we've got the one bed. The two beds on either side, they're quite large. They're quite nice two beds. They're so nice that he doesn't rent them because he doesn't want to deal with tenants. He just cares about the asset value appreciation. And you just see it, like, at night, you can see these blocks, and you can see there's some lights that turn on, and there's some that are just blacked out, and the lights never come on because no one's home, no one's living there, and that's such an issue in London. But at the same time, no one's gonna stop that from happening because it's helping developers, it's helping, taxes and all this other kind of stuff, and there's this skewed incentives that don't actually help the British people, and the British people are just getting driven out of their own neighborhoods. And somewhere like Fulham now is like crazy prices, crazy prices.
And now we're getting into politics, Ryan.
I think to some degree that does also support your free market movement as well, though. Like the other side of things, like you try and buy, if you grew up in New York, you try and buy a flat in New York, you can't. It's too expensive, and that's because there's free movement. There's an economy there. People that are wealthy buy there, and that there is an element of that. Like it's a bit like the people that are buying these houses on the Palm in Dubai probably aren't from Dubai, so the local people aren't going, "I wanted to buy that house," but the people that with the wealth move and buy that real estate. So there is also an element that, even though that we've talked a lot about restriction and how difficult it is to do things, money moves the markets, and there's actually no restriction on that coming into the UK. Well, I mean, they whack up stamp duty in for international buyers, and they're still buying because London's such a honeypot of value And that will continue happening.
It will, but there are some other things though, and I agree it should be a free market, and we should these things should be allowed to happen. But there's also the counterbalance to that, which is you can't then have it to be too difficult for you to build new things. Otherwise, because that's what helps suppress and uphold those asset values, because it's so hard to build new stuff. Whereas if it was easier to build new stuff as well, then suddenly the scales would balance a bit more, and it would work more on the local consumer, the local resident, the people who need to actually live and benefit from these homes, build communities. Like you see London just getting stripped out in all these different areas. And there's one of our investors, he sat on the Landlord Association of the UK and other kind of government bodies that represent the property sector. And he was saying that there's a huge bubble in London that's coming and it's going to burst. And that's in that build to rent, student accommodation, studio-esque type new builds that they're just going up everywhere because so many of them are owned by Chinese nationals and Saudis, Middle Eastern, and just all around the world, Singapore, and they're only affordable because they're willing to put their kids in there throughout uni. And that's not going to be sustainable because local people can't afford those rents and can't afford those purchase prices. So eventually, then they keep knocking these things up. Eventually, that bubble's going to burst, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I don't think London can afford to keep going up in value at the rate it's going. But
I'm
Stefan,
sure
on
they
on a
said
s
that 10 years ago.
yeah, I know, I know. That is the mad thing. That is the mad thing. But rates are becoming as debt increases and as asset values increase. What was it in the 90s? It was something like 4 times earnings was the average house price. Now I think it's 9, 10 times earnings, and there is a point in which that becomes unsustainable. It can't sustain because that it's answerable to the global markets on treasuries and bonds, which is where it's becomes an even playing field. It's got to remain competitive.
Interestingly, Ryan, about these flats that this matey boy doesn't let out, I had a flat in King's Cross which I rented for 3 years. I rented it for 2,400 per month, and I looked at the price again. Chinese owner. I looked at the price of the flat, and it was worth 1.4. Well, she bought it for 1.4 million. And if you work out the actual yield just on the rent, it's 2% on she owned it cash. So she just got in, bang, 1.4 million quid, owned it cash, rented it out to me. So that's 2% on her capital. And you would probably argue that when you actually look at the total return on an investment in London, capital appreciation probably outperforms that at 2% a year. And that's probably what they probably care more about than the actual rental income itself. So they're going, oh, I'll take 4.5%, 5% capital appreciation, and I want it vacant because then I don't have to deal with, people scuffing the boards or not being able to get tenants out. I mean, let's just hope we all come to that level of wealth one day.
But for foreign investors, it's about that safe store of wealth, isn't it? They see the UK as a stable economy and, often not from stable economies. And it just gives them that peace of mind that that cash is somewhere, tied up in a block of flats in King's Crosses. If you've got a fair amount of money, a fairly safe place to keep it, right? There's
Yeah,
not too much going to go wrong with King's
we've
Cross and hopefully in the foreseeable future.
Yeah, we've seen this firsthand with investors. We work with investors all around the world, and particularly investors from the Far East or in places like Africa. They don't care what returns they're getting, really. They just, for geopolitical reasons, they want to diversify their investment and get a foothold in the UK. That's all they really care about. They just want to be in our judicial system with investments, knowing that they're then diversified from what might be a sketchy homeland they're from, or if they're in Hong Kong, they're worried about what the CCP is going to do, and they're trying to exit money into the UK, and that's holding up a lot of our asset values in central prime places like London and these build to rent schemes. And that's where it's unsustainable because that's not going to last forever. And if they've got no vested interest or care in that community or in that town or city, it's purely driven by international financial incentives, then eventually something's going to change. Tariffs, whatever could come out that make these things unsustainable. We just don't know. But really, local house prices in any given area should be driven by the supply and demand of those people that are going to inhabit those places. But we'll stop that there because we could go forever and hyperbole. But something I do want to ask Stefan, though, we asked our good friend Alex Hearn as well, who Stefan knows really well. We asked him the same question: how are you gonna scale, or do you want to scale the brokerage? What's the plan there? If you had a business plan for metrics you want to get to, awards you might have won or want to win, to build up kudos and all that kind of stuff. Where's the roadmap for you now?
So, I mean, awards, I can't believe I forgot to mention it in my intro. We have just been nominated for 3 awards. Thanks for the nudge, right? So the B&C thanks, yeah. So the B&Cs, we've been nominated for Best Bridging Broker, Best Development Broker, and the Service Excellence Award. And I think we're the only brokerage to be nominated in all 3 categories in the country. In terms of Willow's growth plan, at the moment, you know, I don't ever want to lose the bespoke nature of what we do. I don't want this to be a big churn type machine. At the moment, this year we're trying to target somewhere between 75 and 100 million of debt being brokered. Um, I'd like to double that and maybe a bit, maybe get to 200, 250, but I don't want to become the biggest brokerage in the market. I think we'd lose the essence of everything that the company is about if we did that. Um, what I would rather do is have complementary businesses to the brokerage that are aligned and can continue to support developers, but in other ways, and slowly incubate those over the years. So you've seen that with what we're starting to do with Willow Mortgages. So we've got the unreg side, then we've got the reg side. We're looking into investing as either equity or mezz into clients' deals is something that I'm really interested in because I see a real need for it. We've got good access to deals, good relationships with our clients. So if we can work with them on providing equity and mezz into their deals, then that's something I'm keen on. And then at some point, would we consider also being more like the bridging type lender as well? Maybe, but I think that is a business that does have to hit really significant scale to make decent money. Um, and I mean, I'm really happy with where the brokerage is going. I'm really excited about launching the mortgage side of the business. And then my next kind of pet project is that equity mezz investment into clients' deals. So I would rather have 3 good size businesses, up to say 10 employees, rather than get to say just Willow, Capital, the unreg brokerage being 30, 40, 50 people, becoming like a big churn machine.
I've got a follow-on question from that, and give me your brutally honest answer. How the hell do you go from developing stuff to then in a service-based businesses which is quite busy dealing with clients, to then how do you not end up getting involved in developments again? Like, you surely must have like this little itch that's just constantly there, like, go and do a deal, like go and do your own development, or is it just not, doesn't really come into capacity? And so one question is, how do you and how do you stop yourself going down that route? And what are the main reasons you don't want to do developments if that is the case?
So I do still have the itch. I've been scratching it by our personal house. So we when we bought our flat that we have now, we completely did that up. So that scratched that itch. I do still do smaller stuff on the side, like buy to let. We've done a few 1 to 2 bed flats in London, but it just the brokerage takes up so much of my time that I just don't. Development takes everything, right? You guys can attest to it. I cannot run Willow in the way I want to, and also develop. I would never compromise the quality of service. But you're right, I do constantly have the itch to do it, and that's why I'm quite keen in getting into the equity slash mezz space, because it's a way of scratching that itch and being involved in refurbs and developments, but in a way that I can do it with more concentrated time. For the one that we're doing with these clients at the moment, I do a weekly quick call, a monthly slightly longer call, and they send us through a monthly report. When I was doing development, I was sat in the site office from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. chasing contractors round, chasing professionals round. So I still love the development game, and it's what brought me into this world all those years ago when I started refurbing flats when I'm 21. If you Google my name, you'll see it. We were in a Daily Mail, I think it's Daily Mail or Daily Express article, like two friends buying their first flat. That's what brought me into it. But now I just simply don't have the time.
Because if you were running your own development on the side and you had issues or something, because you've got debt on the line, you've got PGs on the line, I can imagine that dragging your attention quickly away from the service model of the business, because you can't let that ball drop, but also then your service quality is going to drop. So I suppose for you, diversifying models needs scale so you can have the middle management to do so. But then with that, you then got to keep quality and service up and keep the culture up that makes you unique. And with that, that can dilute. Interesting you talk about those 3 potential financing options. You won't actually know this, Stefan, because, we only recorded the episode a couple of days ago. It's not come out yet. But me, Jack, and Dorian spent the last episode that's about to come out, talking the whole time about setting up an equity fund, because we see the same sort of opportunity you're talking about, where, that just people need equity and that people struggle raising finance and they don't know how to do that part of the game. And also, if you're long in the tooth of being able to deliver sites and raise finance, then why not offer that as another service? So if you were going to offer the equity side of things, have you thought much about how much you'd want to be deploying, how you'd source the capital, what you'd charge for that sort of stuff?
Equity is a difficult market because you are at the highest end of the risk stack, right? And if things go wrong, you're the first one who's at risk of losing their money. The way I'm looking at it is the type of deals I would like to fund in the equity space is things that I personally understand better. So I like house refurbs, flat conversions, house extensions, you know, the space where, okay, the returns may not be the absolute best, but less can go wrong and you can turn your money quicker. Um, I'm less keen on, getting involved in funding a 50 unit planning play or a big 40 unit build out when you're going into the ground and there's a lot more chance for things to go wrong along the way. So I personally quite like the smaller end of the spectrum because I think as I'm getting older, you get slightly risk adverse. First is the kind of bigger end of the market, but there are people out there who serve the bigger end of the market, and I I don't want to, go and start setting up training academies or anything like that. But in the world that I want to play in that kind of house refurb, house extension space, we are dealing with less experienced developers. And I think potentially having done a lot of those house refurbs and house extensions, we've got something to offer us, not only have we got the money, but we can help you, arrange the finance. We can help you with like monthly calls and just give you like a sounding board to talk things through. So that's the kind of niche that I would like.
That's a similar mentality to why we scaled out the buy-to-lets and the HMOs. It's manageable. It's something that if you can get that working, it's predictable each time. You can build a real kind of pipeline around it. Whereas when you've got these big and more nuanced sites, just one thing can happen, like one we've got at the moment. And we didn't think it would happen on this one, but we were worried it might. And they want us to do a bat survey, and we're coming towards the end of the season now. We might just get in on it. I think we'll just about get it done, and there's no bats there definitely because it was a weed grow, and it's all the whole loft's insulated and the roof's fine, so we should be all right on it. But I've had it before where we had to wait 6 months for them to do the next seasonal bat survey, and then all of a sudden you're tying up capital 6 months.
No, I know, but just to go back onto the equity thing, my little model's good, but if you actually then if you were talking about, launching a proper equity fund, and get serious money out the door, you couldn't do that in small deals. You have to go and fund big deals to get a decent amount of money out the door.
Yeah, but you could keep something like we do with the buy-to-lets and HMOs, where it's not big money, it's small money. It's enough because of the size we are and the size of business we are, where it makes good money for us, and that's fine. But if we wanted to spin that into, you could one investor could come and probably fund all the buy-to-lets and HMOs we're doing now, and it wouldn't even be a great deal of money. It'd be in the single seven figures still. So yeah, if you want to go into developments and do the big stuff, which is what we were talking about on the equity side of things. But there's just so much. It's the regulation. There's so much regulation and bullshit around it. Um, and I don't know. I don't know what's I don't know what would be the best use of time? Is it worth doing something like that, or do our models work nicely as they are? You know, we've got individual investors that work with us. We've got that equity side of things. Consolidating a fund would be nice, but what we've got isn't broken, and we're all scaling. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think it'd be a good idea if we did something like that?
I I really worry about shiny penny syndrome. And, I've seen some clients, they do something and they do it super, super well. Like we've got some clients who are amazing at buy, refurbish, refinance type projects, house to HMO type projects, and they're making money hand over fist, building wealth, building cash flow. And I'm looking at their business and I'm going, this is bloody brilliant. And then 3 months later, they come to me and go, "I've just had an offer accepted on a new build piece of land for 6 houses." And I'm like, "Fine, let's go and do it." And they're doing it because, they feel like they have to take the step to being a bigger developer and this kind of stuff. And I'm looking at it in a way just going, "But your business is so good. You're so good at what you're doing. Why?" And I'm not saying to people, "Don't go out and do something different and don't go out and grow." But, sometimes if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
I'd also say diversify if you want to be the best in that space, because you can't dilly dally. If you're doing something that's bigger than what you're doing, you've got to be on your onions, and you've got to be better than you already are in that other space. So if you're successfully running a HMO portfolio and you want to move into development, it's not something you give it a go. You've really got to go double foot in, and you've got to be more than capable of delivering it. Otherwise, it will tarnish your, like you said, existingly good business.
Yeah, and what one thing I'd say is when I look at our client base, particularly the bigger clients, the bigger developers, they are still doing small deals on the side. So I don't think people should turn their nose up at small deals. Small deals have a real place. The amount of our clients who are doing 10, 20, 30 unit developments and then phone me and say, "Stefan, I've just picked up this two-bed house in Essex for 200 grand. Just going to do a tart and turn refinance for the portfolio." They're hedging their bets on both sides. They're doing the bigger developments for the lumps of cash, and then they're then using that cash that they make off each development to build their personal portfolios and their personal wealth. And there's a real place for people kind of doing both and diversifying their property investments.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. Can you do us a on a we'll do a closeout sort of 10 minutes here, and let's go through what are the typical mistakes, issues, rookie errors that you see made from the developer side when they're going for, bridging or development finance? What's the 101s that people should be aware of? What's best practice to try and get this get this finance that we all need?
Main mistakes. I know it sounds silly, but just simply not being prepared, taking the process for granted. Just thinking, oh, people will give me money, but not putting together a CV, not putting together an A&L, not doing their detailed due diligence before they kind of come to us and come to the lenders is a big one. Not shopping around, you know, just going to that finance company who was at the back of the auction hall and are gonna completely take you for a ride. The biggest messes we see people get into are particularly buying stuff at auction. Do you know a big one? Trying to save too much money, right? Sometimes things are worth what you need to pay for them. So, you know, if you take people who get into a mess at auction, why do they get into a mess at an auction? Because they didn't want to pay 500 quid to get a survey or pay 250 quid to have the legal pack reviewed. Why didn't their deal complete on time? Because they wanted to save 300 quid going for the slightly cheaper solicitor. Why when I phone them in 6 months is it not finished? Because the builder ran off with half the money. Why? Because they probably chose the cheapest builder just to save an extra £1,000. You know, there's, and I get that margin is important, but sometimes you can really compromise the quality and the success of your deal to try and save a few pennies. Sorry, it's not pennies. It can be, a certain amount of money, but sometimes you do need to pay for the right advice, the right support, the right team, and that I think will stand you in better stead, being more successful in the long run than trying to squeeze an extra 2 grand out of a deal.
Do you know what though, Stefan? I think people who are getting into property are always so guilty of that. We were the exact same because from a lot of other sectors in like most areas of business and commerce, you bartering and saving money or the cheaper alternative can sometimes just be fine. It could just be well done. You got it cheaper for some commoditized service or product, whatever it is. But in property, the difference of a good solicitor and a bad solicitor can be a shit ton of money. Could be a whole load of months of mistakes. Could be the difference of missing some clause or something in the underwrite or something in the request for information from the other side. A vendor being sloppy on information that your solicitor doesn't pick up on, and then obviously being cheap on a builder can have drastic implications to a developer. And I think when people come into this space, you can tell them don't skimp out on solicitors, don't skimp out on a contractor. You got to know what's good value, which is why it's people who start out who do it because they don't know what good value is yet. Um, Otherwise, it's going to cost you a shit ton of money. And I feel like no matter how much you tell people, they just won't understand until they've gone through it and gone, it's not worth it. It's not worth getting the cheap.
Yeah, you have to go through it. I mean, even when it comes to lenders now, our more experienced clients. So I've had this conversation with Jack before. It's not always about the rate. It is who is going to be slightly easier to work with, who is more flexible on the back end, who's going to get this done quickest. It's not always the cheapest lender that wins out, because the more you've been through pain in different elements of a property transaction, the more you then appreciate a good service. And if there's anything that anyone listening to this needs to know, is that, in property, everything goes wrong. There's very little that when you come to the end of a project, how many projects have ever finished on time and on budget. And that one of the best character traits that our experienced clients have is they just don't panic. You know, I've had experienced clients in absolute messes, and they might be a bit like a duck, they might be calm on top and completely flapping underneath, but they keep that cool persona. They try and not let things bother them too much. Whereas you often find the inexperienced clients panic at, the smallest things. Like if they see their shadow, they jump, they're waiting to be caught out. And, that type of transaction project can be quite stressful, just as much as clients can try and developers just keep a level head, think things through. As much as things go wrong in projects, equally also almost everything can be solved. Very few things don't have a solution. You just have to, you know be calm enough and pragmatic enough to find the solution.
All those solutions have a nice price tag on them, though, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yeah.
In this space, everything just costs thousands of pounds. Jack, if you think back to when you started, you got any quick rookie error stories that you may have made when you were getting finance? Anything like that?
Definitely agree with Stefan on the most common thing that people do, and I did at the beginning, is look what the cheapest cost of finance is, so the rate that you're paying per year, and going for that rather than thinking what is the best process, where do the fees sit around this product. I definitely can hold my hand up and say that. But whereas now, and Stefan can vouch for this, I'll pick process over rate every day of the week, because I feel that if you always go with the cheapest lender, you kind of almost need a financial director in your company on a salary to manage that, because it's just such a pain in the ass going with a slow. It's all, I believe it's like a sliding scale. The cheaper the rate, the worse the process, and the better the rate, the worse the rate, the better the process. So, I mean, there's obviously a few nuances there. So definitely being rate driven, and now we're process driven. We have to be a very cautious about that on bigger deals, because that 3% can be £500,000.
Do you want to just define process quickly, Jack? Just for those who may not have gone through this process before, what are you looking at when you're comparing processes?
Yeah, so it's I will ask questions such as which values do you work with, which MSs do you work with, how are you funded, what is your funding line, how is it dealt with? Does the originator come in and then hand it over to someone else in loan management, or does the originator sit all the way through the loan? Who underwrites it? How close are they to the originator? What is the process like? Do we go to a point where we have to pay you a fee and it's non-refundable? um the easiest way to ask this is just say to someone like, so I go to Stefan, I've got this deal, I want it funded. Stefan presents me 5 lenders, and I will say, who have you worked with before that's been easy to deal with? That's it. And Stefan will go, these guys, they're a percent more, which costs you 40 grand over the period of the term, but the amount of time that saves me back in my business, I can generate that 40 grand with ease.
But just to build on it, the difference in lenders' processes is wild, right? So on if I take 2 real extremes on a development loan, I have one lender who at the moment is fantastically priced and geared. Their terms are amazing, but I know when I get their underwrite, uh, I'm going to have 30 questions at least to sit there and go through the client one by one by one by one. And it is, it comes with a health warning when the clients with them, I say, look, they are going to be lots of questions and we have to manage it. And they're not the easiest to work with, but the rate is fantastic. Conversely, I've got another lender who is 1.5% more at the moment. They don't have an application form.
And my karma style.
Yeah, in order to submit a case with that lender, I need ID, proof of address, credit report. That's it. You know, and now on, we've got this bridging lender who has now decided to install this 2-step application process. And yes, they're really well priced, but who wants to fill in one application form, but let alone 2? Some lenders' application forms are 2 pages long, some are 20. So the variance when we talk about process, the variance in what the lender's process can be quite stark between lenders. There's obviously what's similar in the middle, but that either end can be significantly different.
There's one lender that we all know, and we were going to use them on something, Stefan, and I think we ended up choosing another lender with you, and they had their own like application that you go through, like a almost like a portal, an online
The
portal.
portal.
Yeah, and whilst the lender may think that's useful to a client because it's kind of streamlining, centralizing it in a way in a portal type view, for me as the client, I'm just going, this is fucking, I don't want to look at your fucking thing in here and your fucking another page and I want to send you an email and I want to go tell me the fucking terms. I just want to get that shit done because I'm moving on with other shit. I don't want to learn your portal and go through all that kind of stuff.
Completely agree. I had a row. Our last accountant, I had the exact same argument. He went, we've got this portal that we've adopted, so it makes it easier. I was like, it makes it easier for you because everything's centralized. But now I've got 16 apps for various different fucking people that think they're clever like you.
It shifts it down, right? Yeah, so we now do a lot of lenders have portals that we have to work through. But it just creates more admin at your level, right? When it was all paper based, we'd send the application form to you, you would fill it in, and then we would just forward to the lender and go, here's the application, and they had to do the input. Now they just, we get the paper application form and then we have to do all of the input. So, I mean,
Yeah,
it's the way
abdicating
it's
the admin.
going, but
Well, there we go. There we go. I know you had a bit of a hard stop today, Stefan, for 8:30. Here we are filming this on
He's got
a
to go and tend to his
Thursday.
clients. Keep the
Yes, he
service
does.
up.
Yes, he fucking does. Well, yeah, Stefan, before we close out though, tell our viewers where they can find you.
so you can find us at willowisle.com. We're on Instagram, and I'm hopefully very easy and approachable. So if anyone wants to drop me an email or get in touch, my email address is canavan@willowisle.com. We are always available. If anyone wants to, have a chat, run a deal past us, our internal SLA is that everything gets answered within 24 hours maximum. So it's never a sustained period before, if you pick up the phone, we phone you back if we're unable to answer straight away. I've had the pleasure of working with all 4 of you. And it's been amazing to see your growth. And I also bloody love this podcast and the amount of people who I meet at networking events or out and about who absolutely rave about you guys and this podcast. You should be really proud. And I can say that because, I've known Jack for donkey's years now from being around the circuit. And I've seen you since that first day a couple of years ago from when we met. It's just phenomenal to see your journey, and now you guys giving back through this is great.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, that's what we are trying to do. We're trying, it's not some noble cause. We want to give back. Obviously, there's a commercial incentive for us to build our brands, but the inadvertent part of us building that brand is just talking for free. People can just listen to this stuff and hopefully take something away from it. And hopefully we can create this kind of this feedback loop of information. And we don't recommend people lightly. And if you're out there and you need financing terms, then trust me, Stefan is the guy to go to. So check him out. Big love. Jack, you got anything to close off with?
Thanks, Stefan, for coming on. Like you say, we've known each other for a very long time, and I second what Ryan said at the beginning. I appreciate your kind words, Stefan. But yeah, if you want someone that knows how deals work rather than just pushes paper around, you know where to find him now.
Amen. And fuck the bank.
Thanks you very much, guys.
Yeah.
Nice one. All right, big love, and subscribe, everyone. Make sure you subscribe. See you next week.
Ground up sound. Ooh, yeah. Real estate deals. We let